I'm here at the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton. We're a national landmark. We're the home of Pollock and Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, two of the most important abstract expressionist artists. You'll notice that behind me are lots of tape and ladders and all sorts of things like that, because we're in the middle of installing an exhibition that will open in May called Creative Exchanges. And this is going to be an exciting show of Lee Krasner's address book. And the artists who are in her address book, many of them will be on display. And she had some address book. Okay, she had a lot of famous people in there. So we have a special guest speaker today. Lois Bender will talk about the garden as art. But before we do that, let's just celebrate spring for a moment. I want to just show you the spectacular property of the grounds of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center. So April, our theme is nature, and this is part of our nature series. And of course, many artists came to East Hampton, to the Springs area in particular, because it is so spectacularly beautiful. We're surrounded by bays and oceans, so the light just bounces off the water and the sky is exceptionally blue and the light is remarkable. Way, way back here is Accabonac Creek, and that will go all the way out. If you kept following it, that would turn into inlets, which would eventually reach the end of Long Island and then eventually turn in, if you turned to the other side, it would become the ocean. So Pollock and Krasner moved here in 1945. They bought the property in 1946. And you can visit the now famous barn studio where Pollock made his famous drip paintings, and Lee painted there after his death, which was in 1956. And you can also come and visit the house. And second best to visiting in person are these virtual programs, where we do some that are straightforward tours, and some like today, where we're fortunate to have many artists sharing their creativity. Okay. You can go to pkhouse.org to see the rest of our programs, and the virtual programs are free. So today I would like to introduce Lois Bender, who I've known for many, many years. And as you could see, Lois has her magnificent paintings behind her. And Lois is an artist. She is an educator. She is a designer, and she is, she works in various mediums, which she will show you today. She's especially adept at watercolor and always trying new things. And one of Lois's inspirations is the garden itself. So Lois is very gracious today to share with us aspects of the garden as art and how the garden inspires her art as well. So let's welcome Lois Bender.
Joyce, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate your invitation to talk, and I love gardens. I love gardens in the Hamptons. And it's a lot of fun to present to the audience. And let me share my screen. Okay, and start. Well, Joyce, we know each other 20 years, I think. So we have history, and it's wonderful history. I started painting in the gardens 20 years ago, first at Gurney's Inn, and then I moved to the other Hamptons and teach watercolor. And it's been a wonderful experience to be in the Hamptons and teaching and painting. And so I love gardens. Here's a medley of gardens from history, and we'll go through them in my talk. I hope to talk very briefly about garden history and show you more of my own work. But first in this medley, we have the Persian garden, which is in the Persian miniature, the only illustration on this page. And it really shows the origin and genesis of garden design. And you could see that it's got a central water fountain and 4 channels with a quadrant with 4 parts of the garden. And I'll show you more as we walk through the tour. Again, this is called Art in the Gardens. a tour of gardens I love and garden-inspired art. And one of my inspiration muses is Joni Mitchell. And many of you may recall her wonderful song about Woodstock, and where she has a phrase, and we have to get ourselves back to the garden. And I certainly believe in that. I was a teenager when that was, when she first wrote it. And it really speaks to going back to the innocence of men. She wrote it in the 60s with the Vietnam War, the youth revolution. And today we have our own problems, and the song speaks to us again. So we're going to go back to the garden and many gardens. This is a sampling of some of the gardens we'll see. There's an English romantic garden at the upper left and a contemporary Dutch garden of tulips. I'll tell you more about them as we proceed. An English landscape garden on the upper right. And the lower panel has a French Renaissance garden, the Jardin du Luxembourg, Italian garden in the center, and on the right, a Moroccan garden. Okay, so when we talk about gardens, let's see what the first gardens are about. And the way I got involved with thinking about the history of gardens was a blog called On Arts and Aesthetics. And it's a wonderful blog by a woman named Talika Balador. And she talks about wonderful cultural trends, and the blog is wonderful. I can leave the link in the chat a little later. But the idea was to talk about a book by Robert Pogue Harrison called Gardens, an essay on the human condition. And he was speaking about why we need gardens throughout art history. One of the great themes of art has been the Garden of Eden. And it's our need to return to original innocence and purity. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and their fall and exile was a popular religious theme by European artists. Before the 15th century, most European images of gardens appeared in illuminated manuscripts. But here we have a painting by Peter Paul Rubens and Jan Bruegel the Elder. They collaborated on many paintings, and the large painting is in the little mortise on the upper left. Now, my cursor doesn't point out. I can't use my pointer when I'm in this mode of a Keynote PowerPoint on the full screen. But you see the large painting on the upper left with Adam and Eve by Peter Paul Rubens, and then all the other work is done by Jan Bruegel. And he used zoos and botanical gardens that were in Brussels in the 1600s. And he painted about 50 Garden of Edens. Now, this doesn't look very Mediterranean or Near Eastern, where the Garden of Eden existed in reality. But he used his temperate climate of Europe and the zoos with the animals like lions and tigers for populating his Garden of Eden. Let's go back to one of the first gardens. Let me go forward. Sorry, we're going backwards. The Egyptian garden was a beautiful garden in this area of the Near East. And what we see here is a pool. Oh my gosh, someone is ringing my bell, which I have to answer. Just a moment. This is not a good time. You have to come back after 3:30. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Wow, that was bad timing. I apologize about that. Excuse me. So back to the gardens. The Egyptian garden was existing 2,000 years before BC, before the time of 0 AD. And it really was a sense of cultivating the Nile and keeping the botanicals and the nourishment of humans in the civilization. On the upper left, you have a model of the Meketra garden in the Met. And it shows the garden with a portico, and you can see it by going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So these are one of the wonderful first gardens that we have. And one of the original gardens was the Persian Paradise Garden, which is called the Chahar Bagh. In 6th century BC Persia, they created gardens based on an earthly paradise, an enclosed space with orchards, flowing waters, shade, and shelter. The Chahar Bagh is a paradise garden. Chahar means four, and Bagh means garden. The four-quadrant garden with a fountain of running water in the center is divided by 4 water channels. The word paradise derives from Persian, pari for around and dis meaning to create a wall. The Garden of Eden imagery was modeled on this garden style. The Bible's Song of Songs, King Solomon celebrates a man and a woman in love in a walled paradise garden. Apparently, we cannot go to Iran to see this garden. It's called the Bagh Fin Garden in Kashan, Iran. I want to just explain the Persian garden's 3 waves of influence. Apparently, this was very fresh information for me, that the Persian garden in the Near East was so influential in Western garden design. But the first wave was in antiquity with Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia and bringing the spread of the garden ideas into the Mediterranean. And the next wave was the Arab culture of Islam, spreading the garden ideas into North Africa, Iberia, and Sicily. And it really influences the medieval Christian cloister design. And the next wave was the 1200s, the CE, the Mongol invasions of Persia, which spread the Persian style to India. And we have beautiful Mughal gardens and Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. So we also have a wonderful golden age of Persian miniatures from 1500 to 1800 AD. So the cloister design is really is also inspiring the Renaissance and Baroque parterre designs and waterworks and Western gardens. So to begin with the antiquity, the Persian paradise garden really influences the Greek and Roman world and civilization. And he brings the garden to the Mediterranean, but we don't have any images of the garden from the ancient world. And these are garden manuscript illustrations in the 1500s. And they really do show the beauty of the garden with the waterworks and the style of the Persian garden, dividing a garden into 4 parts. And it also, the Persian garden also influenced the Indian Mughal gardens. And here we have the Taj Mahal and a floor plan of the garden, which is a map of the beautiful garden. And that garden, I think, is Taj Mahal is built in the 15 or 1600s. The Charbagh cross plan was also a strong theme on Persian carpets. And we see on the left a Persian carpet with a center of a fountain and 4 channels, and the garden elements in the 4 quadrants, and a wall. So the border of the carpet is like a wall of a garden. And I was really astounded to find that out. It was made the carpets very interesting. Here are more images of carpets. And here you have the beautiful designs of the garden. And the garden this was transportable. The theme of the Persian carpets is a paradise garden with a mirror of heaven on its transportable ground plan as it travels the Silk Road. And this was amazing because the people could roll up their carpet and take it from their winter home to their summer home. And it was just a tremendous influence in the mercantile factor of the Silk Road and bringing the culture to different places. We have a contemporary paradise garden and in the Untermeyer garden. I don't know if many of you know, but it has been restored from a very poor state. Untermeyer was a financier, lawyer, and in the early 20th century, and he was a garden lover, horticulturist. And this was called Greystone, but it has been renamed after him. And the garden represents a Persian garden, and you can see the plan, the map on the left side, and it really does follow a Persian plan. So it's a beautiful garden, and please look at the website. It would be great to visit a real great example of this garden. Back in antiquity, we have 2 examples of the beauty of gardens at that time. And the large image is a fresco of a walled garden at the Villa Livia, and it has a great sense of illusion. And this woman, Livia Drusili, was the wife of Octavian, who became the Emperor Augustus. So they were the top of the line. You also have the recovery of the ancient world's way of life from Pompeii. And on the left is the House of Vetti, which has a Roman-style peristyle garden, which has the elements in the atrium and the interior of the garden. The horticulture is named after the goddess Horta, the goddess of gardens. And the word in Latin for an enclosed garden is hortus conclusus. And this is one of my wonderful feelings about the history of the legacy of classicism. And it's the Greek Roman goddess, the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. And it's wonderful how Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, and his classification system gave the names of the Greek gods and goddesses to all of the flowers. And it's said that the Greek goddess Chloris, which is Flora as the Roman name, is said to have caused the metamorphosis of Adonis, Attis, Hyacinthus, Crocus, and Narcissus into flowers and names. And it was the pursuit of knowledge, and people like Leonardo da Vinci, painting from real life, started the field of botanical illustration. And so you have the wonderful artists like Ray Doutet, who is the court painter for Josephine Bonaparte, and I think also Marie Antoinette, leaving us wonderful illustrations. Today's interior designers love his work. And you have the age of the Dutch flower painting, the 1600s, the golden age. And my mother's name is Flora, which helps me love the period. And it also helped me, love gardens. So continuing this spread, we're going to go and spread the Persian garden into Spain with the Alhambra Palace Gardens and General Life Gardens. And this was the second wave of Persian garden influence. And there was a love of including the waterworks, the reflecting pools, and the gardens themselves to create this beautiful campus. And this actually influenced the medieval garden in Europe. And here we have examples of paintings showing the garden in the Middle Ages. And on the upper left, there's an image of the cloisters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I hope many of you have been there. It's a wonderful example. And it was moved from a location in Europe. I'm not sure which garden it was. Below it is the Alhambra cloister gardens. And you could see the relationship of the Alhambra and the Moorish style of design was influencing the European medieval cloister garden. Right below that is a fortress style medieval castle in Italy with some gardens. And so the horticulture was important for practical reasons, for food. And throughout the ages, there have been many styles, but it's interesting to watch the development. And by Christianity took the idea of the enclosed garden and used it as symbolism to represent the virginity of Virgin Mary, that she was protected in this garden. And you also had all the flowers having a symbolism, a Christian symbolism that was derived from this story of the Bible and the plants. So Christianity took on a lot of the history behind the garden. We come now to other gardens in the Renaissance. You have the Italian style garden, which was spurred on by the recovery of classical texts of the ancient world. And there's so much ornate gardens because the wealthy would play catching up with the Joneses, and they would all one-up each other with these wonderful pergolas, fountains, waterworks. So all of them is spectacular. And there's this incredible website that lists all these wonderful places to go to in Italy. And John Singer Sargent was in love with the Italian gardens, and that's a wonderful watercolor that he did of the Villa di Marlia in Lucca. And I love the contrast and the gorgeous, sharp, warm and cools in that watercolor. And the French Renaissance also followed the ideas of classical art. They have this beautiful garden called the Luxembourg Gardens. Many of you probably know it. There's a lot of geometrical, symmetrical patterns influenced by the Italianate panoramas, grand vistas. the floral statuary accents, and there's a large green parterre formal plan. And statuary is very important. And there are two levels here. And the two levels were to invent tricks and ways to have different views of the garden. Then the Baroque garden just took that idea of the Renaissance and expanded it. The Baroque garden is grandiose gardens at the scale of Versailles with many green parterres, garden designs, canals, grottos, amusements, designed by the great landscape designer Lenotre, who surpassed the scale and principles of the Italian garden design. Now, I didn't know this, but these are court gardens, royal gardens, and the King of England and the King of France were competing for these beautiful gardens. So you have William III of England, who created Hampton Court, and he was competing with Louis XIV at Versailles. And so you have the sense of each of these monarchs outdoing each other. And I mean, there were intimate gardens besides these large scale public royal gardens. And here's an example of an intimate garden. This is in England, and it's the romantic English cottage style garden. And it was inspired by Romanticism, the English romantic poets. And it's floral and smaller in scale. It's simple and adored. It has a meandering feeling, and it's for a different feeling. It's more solitary and personal as a garden. And it said that the Paradise Lost by Milton was inspiring this idea of the lost garden in his Paradise Lost. This is the Dixter House in Sussex, UK. There are so many of these gardens there. This is another destination. Each one of these is on my bucket list. This is the English landscape style. And you have the influence of classicism. The architect Palladio was very influential with the Greek classical style. And the reason the 1700s was involved with it is because they discovered Pompeii in the 1700s. And that brought up the influence of classicism. So here you have the buildings like the Pantheon on the property. There was obviously all these are wealthy English aristocrats who build these, and they're interested in the vistas and the view and a narrative walking through the garden with different focal points, like to change moods. And these are beautiful gardens, and you have to get far away and walk through it. I bet it takes a whole day to walk through the garden. And then leaving Europe, we have a beautiful garden here in Morocco. It's the Majorelle Garden, created by a French artist who moved to Morocco in the 1920s. And this is his color, Majorelle blue. And it is so magnificent because it blends so many plantings in different, the atmosphere is tropical yet dry climate. This was in disrepair after Majorelle died, and it was bought by Yves Saint Laurent and Berger in 1980, and creating this oasis garden, which is a tourism destination. And the adjectives I'm going to use are just, it's a spectacular, the color just embraces you. It's exotic, Arabic, Mediterranean, Art Deco, and lush and intimate, and has Matisse-like colors. And it's very bold. And this is on my list to visit. And as we just finish up our tour of garden styles and cultures, this is the Chinese garden style. And it has both the imperial royal feeling or an intimate feeling. And scholar gardens were literary and meditation retreats for philosophical aesthetic transcendence, with viewing pavilions and panoramic landscapes, scenes inspiring poetry. It said that water and rocks are the mainstay of the Chinese garden. And it's very symbolic, like colors mean a lot, shapes mean a lot, so that the moon has a wonderful symbolism in this garden. And there's much more to say. Obviously, I'm making this brief and rushing through. There's much more to say in a longer conversation about each of these garden styles. And with the Japanese garden, it's a very intimate, beautiful garden with asymmetry and the seasons predominating. And this is a style that heavily influenced Western art. And we'll see that when we look at Monet, who took on the feeling of Japan in his garden, in the water garden. And it's, I think Japanese, we know this in art history generally, that Japanese art had a big influence on the French painters. It would cause the painters to flatten the space and see the design of the page in a different way than prior, didn't have to have deep space. And the pond is a beautiful way that he could compress space. The other painters in the 20th century, we have Gustav Klimt, who loved gardens. And I remember going to MoMA when I was 10 and seeing the painting of trees where 90% of the painting was pointillism of the trees and 10% below were the tree trunks. And I couldn't believe that kind of invention. It was just a gorgeous painting to behold. Bonnard is an important garden painter, and also an artist maybe many people aren't familiar with as I am. He's Henry Edmund Cross on the lower right here, who has a bit of a pointillist style. And this watercolor is at the Met, and it's a beauty to look at that intimate quality of translating his studio garden. And just wrapping up the story about gardens, and there's so much more. You have the contemporary styles in garden rooms in the 20th century. And this is Kikkenhof in the Netherlands. It's a contemporary style garden. And you have the personality of modernism, daring color, form, dramatic spaces. It's eclectic and niche. And it shows freedom, personality, and expression in the landscape. These are beautiful, and it's probably flourishing right now. Then there's a contemporary design firm that I absolutely adore. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Wirtz family in landscape architects. When I looked into the garden, I was floored. I couldn't believe this was a way of looking at gardens. And to read the first sentence, understanding the art of contouring, undulating motion, and restricted color palette, symmetry, and universal geometry. Mr. Jacques Wirtz works in big movements and big gestures in small and large gardens. In the next paragraph, the plants at first appear to be pagan creatures immobilized under some sort of spell. And I want you to look at this. This for me was just like the opposite. It was like large mounds of green. And this is his personal garden. The father of the firm, he died last year or the year before, and his family continues the firm. He's a designer of the garden at the Louvre in Paris. This is kind of a winter style garden, and you can see it's quite interesting and strange and magical, even in the winter. And so I love many more gardens, but this is some of the gardens I love. So I wanted to take you through the tour before I show a little of my work. Before I show my work, I want to just talk about Jennifer Bartlett. I don't know if many of you know her, but she's an artist for the last since abstract expressionism, and she's known for systems of large grids in a contemporary way of abstract symbols in her work. But in her early career, she painted on location and doing observation. And this garden image is just beautiful. She was in Nice in the south of France, and she painted this pool, and you see that layering of the top of the pond water with the leaves, the depths and the reflection. I just love her work. She passed away last year, and her work remains. This is my work, and I'm going to show you a little bit more in a moment. And it does show you the materials I'm working in, which is watercolor, photography or photograms, chincolet and printmaking, and gold metallic paint and stencils. So I will just switch slides for a moment because I have to go to the other one. And I can entertain questions if you like during the talk. Joyce, what do you think is best? Waiting to the end or during the talk?
I think it's better to wait till the end.
Okay, great. Here we have a piece I did lately, which represents plants parting the waters. It was part of a a show, a theme about the creation of the Genesis. And I had the third day, which is when God parts the waters with land and earth. And I used the fiddlehead ferns as an inspiration for these spirals, which I love them. And the spirals go out into the water. And I also was thinking of Art Nouveau style. So I've used the garden as a resource of ideas. And again, just to say, I'm working with watercolor, photograms, metallic lines, and stencils, and I'll show a little bit of each. I like the layering and shadows and reflections when I'm working, so I seek to do that. Let me show you a little bit more. But first, I've got a practice of observation where I go out to gardens and paint, like a lot of us urban sketchers. And I have gardens from France and from the Hamptons and New York City. And I'll talk about each of them a little bit more. This is a medley of gardens that I painted in the Hamptons. And over the years, there have been garden tours given by Guildhall and the Parish Art Museum. So I love going them to see all these incredible gardens that the landscape designers are incredibly talented. But a survey here shows the home of 1770 house on the upper left. Then there's photographs of gardens, and Gurney's Inn is the third one in, and a walled garden. On the second row, after the hydrangeas, there's the sculpture of Buckminster Fuller at Longhouse. And next to it is Wolfers, where I've been teaching painting and other classes there. And they have a beautiful big pot of geraniums. And next to it is the Sag Harbor florist, where I painted and taught painting. And her designs are incredible. On the bottom row, I have the decor of the patriotic days that we have, Memorial Day, 4th of July. I love the way the home properties have all that wonderful patriotic ornamentation. And Topiary is another flower shop in Southampton. And then you have Lavender Fields, and the last one is the field at Wolfers. So I've been around to a lot of the gardens in the Hamptons, and it's always a joy. About 2 years ago, I was painting at Landscape Details during the Guildhall Gardeners Art tour, and I did several paintings of their property. And, you know, it's interesting to look at the diverse kinds of feelings you can get and the purposes of painting in different ways, whether it's making the house and the lawn a center of attention, or the alliums, or a wall of climbing roses. And then what also captured my attention was the tree, the large tree. I'm not sure what kind it is now looking back, but each one of these is something that will make me say, I want to try that. I want to capture the light or the shadows or the color. And this is a close-up. One of the problems I was trying to solve was the deep saturation in the shadows, in the shade. Usually it's a problem to get the richness when you have darks. So I was just trying to do that contrast with those chartreuse greens and those alliums. This is another garden. These are alliums also. I painted in this garden for 4 years and taught watercolor for 4 years at Bridge Gardens. And it was a wonderful time. And there's a clubhouse there. And I would encourage you to visit Bridge Gardens now. They have a wonderful program. They had an herb garden where I painted it in watercolor on the right and used pastel as well. And another garden that I love out there, for many of you who've been out there, is Meadow by Robert Dash. It's his inspiration and baby. It's like Alice in Wonderland out there. It was a miraculous garden, and it does change. I don't think it's done in the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue right now, but he had a fabulous imagination. Since he's passed away, his foundation is taking on the garden. On the very lower right, I want to point out the lattices in the grid form and the patterns. I don't think that's there anymore, but I was just floored by the beauty of the complexity of all those directional forces in that shed area. I painted the loo. That would be the bathroom area. So yeah, and each emotionally you want to use line sometimes, or line and paint. It depends. You really see what the mood, what your object you're painting is telling you it wants to be painted as. This is Longhouse, and Longhouse is another beautiful garden with sculpture. and Jack Leonard Larson founded it. It's continued today. And I love painting, and I was thinking about the color in the garden when I painted the watercolor. It has sand dunes, which are incredible. So I encourage you to visit there too. Then leaving the New York area, I went to Paris, and I'm painting the Louvre here. You see, it's a panorama. Because in Paris, there are no high buildings, very few. You have large cloudscapes and vast areas to paint clouds. So that was parallel. I worked that into painting the flower bed, which was colorful. I went in May many years ago, but I enjoy seeing the large vistas when you paint. And the lower portion of this slide is the Jardin de Luxembourg, and that is just wonderful with all the measured sense of there's a sense of measurement with all the vases and urns, which gets smaller in the distance, and it's kind of fun to watch the recession in the painting. So I've painted many of these panoramas. These are some more urns, and they're just very inspiring because of the geometry. And yeah, and there's a flower bed up at the upper left of Paris. It's time to go back to Paris. And back in New York, you have Wave Hill, one of my favorite gardens here. And there are many moods and styles in their garden rooms or the different locations. I love the pond. They have a beautiful pergola. They overlook the Hudson. At the upper left is one of the greenhouses that I painted. Sometimes I have a quick, fast style, and sometimes I'm more polished. And this is the pond in daylight. I'm watching the energies of the brush strokes moving through the pond. I've done this, I've been painting there about 10 years, so I have different compositions. And it's important to vary your greens when you're painting, and you kind of get into where is this green going? Is it dark, light, greener, or yet redder? And that's what we do when we're painting. These are in the botanical garden, the conservatories. This is in Brooklyn, and I'm painting a fellow sketcher. I look for white spaces when I'm painting so that I have a range of light to dark. And the additional image here is the pergola with shadows of wisteria on the lower left. And the upper right, I have that very famous red gateway that's in the Japanese pond of Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Sometimes I choose to use a line, so I have pen and ink and watercolor. But observation gives you a sense of practice, just like piano scales. Now I move to the Garden Spirits, which is the images I have that I use for a line of stationery that I did about 25 years ago. And Garden Spirits to me are the shapes and silhouettes of the shapes of plants, and I was just very taken with that kind of symbolism of the beauty of uniqueness of each kind of plant. And the kind of analogous colors of green here really appealed to me. And I created a greeting card line, which I'll show you in a moment. But this is the book that started it all, called Garden Spirits. And I have an actual book here. And what I was doing was creating the line art and photograph. I did this sage in the middle, that's a sage leaf. I put that on a Xerox machine and made a black and white Xerox of it. And then I would take that and clean it up. And then I used it for printing, one color printing at the printer. And I got a variety of beautiful color variations from just one color printing. I'm also using line in this book and poetry. It was great quotes from history. It's also a partner book I had called Tea Quotes. So the line of stationery I had was Tea Quotes and Garden Spirits, which I love doing. At its peak, I had 500 stores, and it was a lot of fun, but a lot of work. So I'm going back to lines today, as I'll show you at the end of the talk. And this was a silk scarf I did with the inspiration of those Garden Spirit shapes. On the left is a silk scarf. I do different mediums for a couple of years, and I move on to another medium. On the right are different mediums of these plant images, such as dry point printing or photography or watercolor. And this is the trade show of that time. I had the line of stationery that looked more like, I don't know, it felt like woodcut images on the first line, which is on the right, and the second line, those colors were that was printed on translucent paper. And it's carrying at the Sag Harbor florist into today. She carries. I still have some left over. I also did watercolor of flower arrangements, and that's a whole body of work, which is on the website called GardenSpiritsNY.com. And that was when I worked with the Sag Harbor florist a lot. And the beauty of all the arrangements was stunning to look at and then translate into the paintings. The geraniums again, I can't get away from geraniums. But the next body of work I'm going to show you is stencils. Stencils are a big part of my work lately, and some of these stencils go back 25 years, and I'm still using them. These are printmaking, so I put them into the press and they give me an imprint. But I can also spray and use another technique to make artwork and paintings. But these are more in the printmaking mode of monoprints. And this is spraying. One of the problems of spraying with these is it's not healthy. So this is why I'm searching for other ways of working now, because it's spray and aerosols. You have to be outdoors. You have to wear the bug eye mask. It's pretty intense. And these are more images. So beside the kind of flowers I found that come from 25 years ago, I found lately a eucalyptus leaf branch, which is at the bottom right. And the current work I have, which I'm showing at Sarah Nightingale Gallery, is using the eucalyptus plant, those round, beautiful leaves. And I'm using spray and drips. Thank you very much, Jackson Pollock, for giving us drips. And they're it's fun to see how they come together. This body of work, some of it is at Sarah Nightingale's. This shows a combination of the eucalyptus plant plus other forms that I've used in the past. I call this the bubblegum pink painting. And now I'm returning to lines. I'm working with line work to vary what I do. I haven't worked with lines in a long time. I'm using patterns. I'm using the splatter on the back of the right one. And we'll see where this goes. And this is current work right now. It's very different from my other work. And that's what's so intriguing, how to invent again and reinvent. So I'm using lilies here and enlarging them and having close-ups. Maybe people like the line of Ellsworth Kelly comes into my thinking, but the large close-up flowers is what I want to do. The centerpieces are the studies for it, because they're small sketches. And the outside two pieces are larger paintings of acrylic on canvas. And these are sketches I'm trying to create into large paintings too. The tulip, I'm doing the series to show color change. But I like the spontaneity of the line on the sketches above. And that's the hard part, to create it into the paintings, the spontaneity of that and translate it into another medium. And these are more sketches that I'm developing. What I found in looking at my past work, I found that little kitty cat whose name was Poco Loco. And that cat, I use the varied lines there, and I love those different color lines. And I think that's what I want to try to do, work with changing the colors in lines. So that'll be coming up. And I want to show two last projects that to wrap up the talk. And the first one is stencils that I did painting coral reefs. And what the corals are just so beautiful, and they allow me to use full color range. And I really love doing that. These were done for the shows this past 2 years that a friend of mine, a curator, artist friend, Marcia Annenberg, showed at Ceres Gallery. And I made these two large panorama panels. And the first show was Earth on Edge, which is the left series of watercolor stencils, and the right is Mayday Earth, which just happened this past December. I want to draw your attention to the photograph of the white coral. That white coral is a dead coral. And this is what we're fighting, because it's urgent to have us respond to changing the habits and changing the temperature rising, and fight that on every front. In these panels, in the last panel, in the lower portion of the right lower painting, I put a more white coral stencil painting because I want to show that we're losing the colors. We're losing this manifestation of an important part of our ecosystem and our life. So I wanted to show it by color how important what we have is before we lose it. So I'll show you just a few. And this is an example of the stencil and manipulating the stencil so I get a rich contrast of colors, and I'm using this type of coral to show movement. And this I was using the drips to also have another layer and have the fish in there too. And some of these images are the brain coral. And I found myself having fun researching all the kinds of corals. So let's remind ourselves to, and with art, we should, I feel, in my own opinion, to support improving and changing the earth for better humanity. So this is my contribution. And the very last part I'm going to show you are my pools of reflection, which are based on the beauty of the pond in Wave Hill. And you can go there in the evenings. They have 4 summer evenings on Wednesday nights in the summer. And when you get the sunset on top of reflecting, making shadows and reflections in the pond, it was a beautiful inspiration for me. And I liked it at the nighttime at dusk. It's so magical. And I took a quote that I came up with, which is, the pond is an eye, a mirror connecting the earth to the sky. And it's so true that as a reflection, it unifies the sky and the earth below us. So the water is where you get the blend. And I have in watercolor here, the reflections of plants, and I have a drawing of plants as well. And I'll quickly go through here. This is what I'm going to show you. These are reflections of water and the grasses, the flowing waters. These are photographs. This was the start of my inspiration because I worked from the photographs. These are a photograph at the upper left, double exposure. There's a pastel in the center of the shadows in the pond. On the upper right are a collage and a photograph and a monoprint. And then the larger pieces is a trace monoprint on the left and watercolor drawing and painting on the right. And it was very wonderful to see all the mixed ways I could interpret the pond. These are watercolors that were painted directly on spot. And I was very mesmerized by the clouds and the shadows in the water. In the lower left, you could see the pond and the reflecting actual scene that I was looking at. These are sketches I'm doing to be able to translate and make into bigger paintings. So studies are really comfortable. It's like kind of just playing around, scribbling. These are photographic ideas where I'm doing double exposure through Photoshop and trying to come up with that third, kind of idea of melding the two and putting out a different image. So I really enjoy working with the colors. In this case, I wanted to show the nighttime in the sense, and I'm working on the top with mixed media, and that would be watercolor, an ink drawing, a photograph, and I think acrylic medium. So it's kind of nice and moody, I think. And the bottom is a trace monoprint, also showing a feeling of the line art at night of the pond. And on the top here, I have sepia treatment of the photographs with double exposures. And I like that, the sense of the curves of the grasses intersecting with the images of the pond. And the bottom is a stencil monoprint. It's quite large. And this is more photographic double exposure work. And I really enjoy seeing what happens when you put together two things and get a third idea. And the bottom half is watercolor and line work, and top is double exposure photographs. And again, I have watercolor on the left and a photograph on the right. It's interesting to see how things read together. They, it's nice to have series of work in a line and create, diptychs, triptychs, etc. And this is a monoprint of the same design, and on the left, a monoprint, on the right is another monoprint with more line work in it. And a watercolor. This is a large watercolor, 26 by 40. And this is a trace monoprint where I have a line, plus I'm doing stencil work in addition to it. And here you can see the stencils plus a trace monoprint in there too. It's the edge of the pond or the reflections of grasses. And at the very end here, I have work that was more recent. The monoprint is on pink paper on the left, which was beautiful to work with. And in the center and right are pastels. And I like working with the hatching idea of pastels, of showing the actual mark, not making it smooth. I like having evidence of the hand. And this is the very living room in which you see me in. And this has been on my wall many years, and I'm showing the kind of reflections of the grasses of the pond and the water lilies. And it's just made me very happy being in the home with this image in my eyes every day. And on the right, I have that growing fiddlehead fern image too. And this is the next place. I want to go to Majorelle Gardens in Morocco. So we'll see what happens. Then just to wrap up, this is kind of 50 years between these two artworks. I know it's hard to believe, but painting in my teenage years, working then, I had that kind of an idea. I mean, when you're young, you don't know where you're going or what you're doing, you're just doing it. And on the right, I'm more conscious of what I'm doing, obviously, but it's fun to see the blend of imagery that happens at different times of your life. And that's why I want to end with this continuity of looking at water and water and plants throughout my life. So there you have it. I want to thank everybody for coming. And I'd like to thank Joyce. And there's something I can do or say now, Joyce? What would you like me to do?
Yes, well, we have a few minutes for questions. How about, can you take the screen share off and then you can answer some questions? Let me look in the chat. We have Lois, first off, like, thank you so much. That was everyone. I know there's so many comments coming in that everyone is just astounded. Everybody's applauding. I mean, and I've known you for so long, and yet at the same time, I actually learned so much. I appreciate your art and you even more than ever, to tell you the truth. So some questions here. Interesting question from Joanne. Have you ever tried embroidery?
No, I haven't. You know, I know that in England, when I was 25 years ago, I went to some graduate students in Great Britain because they were carrying my card line there. And the point I'm making is they were very big into the sewing and textiles, but no, I've stayed only on paper gardens only. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Joyce, this is Joanne. I really encourage you to do embroidery. I'd be happy to show you. I just learned only 6 months ago in England, so.
Oh, wow.
I can share my information with Joyce, and if you wanted to speak. Thank you. Thank you so much. And also fabric. I also put a comment about you would be making pillows and fabric. I mean the fabric. You're just phenomenal. Oh my gosh. Wonderful. Thank you. A joy to see your artwork.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joanne. And we're going to stick with the chat since we have close to 60 people. So Dorothy says, when you mention drawing, are you using markers and colored pencils as well? So what are your drawing media?
Well, they're diverse. Pen and pencil or ink, a very inky line is wonderful with a pen, fountain pen. You know, as I said, I haven't stressed line as much as shape and pen and color. So I, just grab any material. There's no one favorite pencil or line, but I'm still studying what to do. It's a spontaneous idea too. Or sometimes when you work with people, you see someone do something, they say, I'm going to try that too.
And Mary says, wondering what a trace monoprint is.
Oh, sure. Well, what you do is you have a surface, a plate. Maybe I use plastic mainly, or it could be copper, whatever, but you ink it up totally. So it's a total flat plane of ink. And then you place a blank paper on it. And on the back of that paper, you are tracing with a pencil or any sharp tool that you have, an implement. And if you have a tracing paper on it, you can trace a certain design. So what you're doing is you're pushing that paper into the ink where the pencil goes, so that it lifts up that line. So you get a linear imprint on the paper. And that's basically a trace monoprint. Paul Klee did it a lot.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And Janet K says, what materials do you use for stencils and how do you cut them?
Well, I had a Japanese source of paper that was very plastic-like. If you get a strong paper that's a bit thick, they will last a long time. So I don't have a particular source of great stencil paper right now. Tyvek is a little thin. Strong paper, someone told me that you could put acrylic medium on paper, which then insulates it from wetness, and it also makes it last longer. I cut them out myself with a X-Acto blade or a scissor. You know, the originality of a stencil shows your personality. People have asked, do I buy them or make them? But when they're bought and you use them creatively, you know, it's your personality too. Nothing against bought stencils at all.
Good point.
Mhm.
And Allie Berman says, let's do an art, drawing, painting trip to the French Garden. Sign me up. So actually, on that note, Allie, I would like to ask, and Lee says, do you give online classes? Do you have any venues coming up where you're teaching, or where you would like to teach, or anything like that?
Oh, thank you for asking. I am trying to work with Guildhall this summer. We're still talking, or we'll see what happens, but I'd like to paint in different gardens, different private gardens. If anybody has a source or would like that, I would be happy to do that and talk about that. And I have a residency in New York City for 3 months this summer, so I'll be coming out to the Hamptons with doing that. I also teach at Wolfers between the Harvest Festival and some painting classes recently. It's been very interesting. I've taught all over the place in the Hamptons, but I'll talk to people if they'd like for custom classes, or to give me ideas of where there's a possibility to teach this summer. So thank you. I wouldn't be happy to hear any recommendations.
And Lois, I have a question. So where can we purchase your art? Because it's so beautiful. And I could see so many applications for your art, for homes, for hotels, for public spaces, because it is so uplifting, and some of the works are quite large, which is nice too. So where would somebody purchase your art, or would they contact you, or?
Well, for canvases and works on canvas, Sarah Nightingale in the Hamptons in Sag Harbor is carrying my work, so she would be a person to contact. I could introduce you to her. Also, I can talk to you about any other work. I'm self-dealing my own work. I'm dealing my own work out of my own home and studio. But yeah, I have, a lot of different variety of work to look at. I'd be happy to talk to anybody interested. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you, Lois. We are going to have to end. You can see I have my winter coat on. It's spring, but it actually feels like winter today in New York. And Lois, thank you so much for giving us that unbelievably inspiring talk about the history of gardens. There are so many accolades coming in from the chat. So many people said brilliant, brilliant colors, brilliant talk, gorgeous, love this. I mean, cool idea. It just goes on and on and on. There are so many from all over the world, from the UK, Las Vegas, Canada.
Oh, thank you.
And so you've inspired so many people today. And I do want to, yes.
I'm happy to also offer giving talks also in addition after today. So, and can talk more about garden history or more, whatever, customize the talk as needed. So thank you, Joyce.
Yeah, and you can go to Lois's website as well. What is your website, Lois?
It's my name, simply loisbender.com, also loisbenderart.com. They both lead to the website.
Good. And Lois, again, thank you so much for zooming in from New York and sharing your amazing creativity. So,
Thank you very much, Joyce. We'll be
everybody, thank you for coming. Have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are. Thank you, Lois.
Thank you.